Residents don't experience departments, they experience one municipality. And if the story they receive is fragmented, trust doesn't just weaken, it becomes confused. Welcome back to A Blueprint for Building Public Trust. I'm Kent Waugh. In the last episode, we talked about systems, continuity, time, design. But even when those systems exist, there's another problem that quietly undermines them: alignment. Inside a municipality, work is organized by departments: planning, engineering, communications, finance, each one doing its job, each one communicating in good faith. But residents don't see that structure. They don't experience separate departments. They experience one organization, one voice, one story. And when that story isn't aligned, it doesn't feel like complexity. It feels like confusion. Let me show you what that looks like in practice. I was asked by a municipality how they could best position a successful engagement campaign to support a new city hall. And the first question I asked them was simple: how much time do you have? Because for a project of that scale, you don't start with engagement. You start with understanding. For some people, that question made sense, but for many, it was surprising because internally the issue already felt urgent, important, obvious. And there's a common assumption that comes with that. If it's important to us, it should be important to everyone. But that's not how it works. Inside the organization, a project like City Hall can live in plans, strategies, internal discussions for years. It becomes familiar, but for residents, it doesn't exist until you tell them. And when you compress that entire timeline into a few weeks or a few months, you're not informing the community, you're surprising them. And this is where another disconnect shows up. Municipalities often point to master plans, strategic documents, previous approvals as evidence that the direction is clear. But most residents have never seen those documents. They don't know they exist. And even if they did, they wouldn't understand how those pieces connect, because those systems are designed for internal decision making, not public understanding. So instead of building awareness over time, what often happens is this: the project is introduced with a solution, a location, a concept, before the community fully understands the problem. And that's where the resistance begins. Not because the idea is wrong, but because the sequence is. In this case, the municipality did speak to the real issues: cost, risk, building failure, but the timeline was compressed. The messaging felt accelerated, and to too many residents, it didn't feel informative. It felt like it was being pushed, almost as if there was another agenda, even when there wasn't. At the same time, they introduced a new location far from the existing city hall and justified it through transit access. Now, internally, that may have made sense, but externally, it added another layer of uncertainty. Because for many residents, City Hall isn't just a building, it's a habit. It's where they go once a year to pay taxes, to ask questions, to interact with the city. And suddenly, that experience was changing without enough time to understand what it meant. And this is where the human side gets missed, especially for seniors. They weren't asking about policy. They were asking, will I be able to get there easily? Will there be parking? How long will it take? Will I feel safe? Not unreasonable questions, but questions that weren't fully addressed. Not because the city didn't care, but because the system wasn't designed to surface them early enough. And this is the pattern. not a lack of effort, not a lack of intent, a lack of alignment between internal timelines and public awareness, between what departments know and what residents understand, between when the story starts internally and when it starts externally. Because the reality is, for a project like this, you don't need more persuasion. You need more time. Time to explain the building, its age, its limitations, its history. Time to show how the city has grown around it, how staff have expanded, how services have changed. Time to help residents understand that what once worked no longer does. Even something as simple as this: if a building is 60 or 70 years old, we understand what that means. We've all replaced a roof, a furnace, a water heater at some point in time. Things reach the end of their life, and framing it that way humanizes the issue. It connects, it creates understanding before the decision ever needs to be made. But instead, most municipalities do the opposite. They compress time, they introduce solutions early, and they try to move quickly to avoid resistance. But in doing that, they create the very resistance they were trying to avoid. You cannot design a compressed process and expect expanded trust. And this is why alignment matters, because even if one department understands this, if others don't, the system breaks, the story fragments, and residents are left trying to piece it together on their own. Residents don't need more information. They need a clearer story, delivered over time in a way they can follow. Because when the story is clear and consistent, support doesn't need to be forced. It builds. If this resonates, share it with teams working on major projects right now, because the difference between resistance and support is often not the decision. It's how the story was built. In the final episode of the season, we'll talk about what makes trust durable, why it can't live in individuals, and why it must live in systems that outlast them. Trust isn't built through pressure, it's built through alignment.